absolute banger. Coming up this weekend in the main event, we have No Mercy Petr Yan, the former undisputed UFC bantamweight champion. He scuttled a little bit in his last 4 fights, 1-3 in those, taking on a man representing Georgia. The nickname's The Machine. He's not Bert Kreischer, it's Merab Dvalishvili. 8-fight win streak after dropping his first 2 in the UFC. And Merab Dvalishvili has the distinction of being one of the few Dana White's looking for a fighters who's had success in the UFC. So for Dvalishvili, it's been wild. He sent Jose Aldo to boxing in his last fight. How just crazy
a single tear coming down my eye.
The UFC Hall of Famer Jose Aldo outstruck by Merab Dvalishvili. No takedowns earned from Merab in that fight. He went 0 of 16 on takedown attempts in that fight. So great to see from Merab. He continues to win. His corners last time out: Ray Longo, Harry Connick likes the freaking lasagna, Aljamain Sterling, the current champ, mind games with Petr Yan this time, and a man who every single time goes, "Come on, Merab!" Matt Serra in that corner. So for Merab Dvalishvili, a great opportunity. These two guys, ranked number 2 is Yan, ranked number 3 is Merab. They have a giant opportunity in this fight because the division's logjam. We talked about it earlier on. Sean O'Malley's the only top 5 ranked guy that doesn't have a fight. And if you look at it in the landscape, Aljamain Sterling, UFC 288, defends against the king of cringe, Triple C, Henry Cejudo. So it really does logjam things and hold everything up. At least we get this great fight. It's a poster fight. It's a top 5 fight. It's a great, great fight. And I couldn't be more excited for Yan versus Dvalishvili.
This is an incredible matchup. And it's funny that you bring up Jose Aldo a few times because Petr Yan's takedown defense to me reminds me of one fighter in the world, and it is Jose Aldo. And I know Jose Aldo's kind of reached that mythical standpoint of, hey, his takedown defense is pretty much second to nobody's, but Yan really does have those active hips that reminds you of a guy like Aldo, because Yan's someone who will go for the sprawl, use his hands, stick the underhooks, can kind of use everything at once and doesn't just have to focus on one area of his takedown defense game. And I think that'll be interesting to see because, like you had brought up, Dvalishvili went for a ton of takedowns against Jose Aldo. He went 0 for 16, but he wasn't able to accomplish any of those. Now, a lot of what Merab is able to do successfully with his MMA game plan is based off of the threat of the takedown because his striking has gotten better. There's no doubt about that, but he is still incredibly wild with his striking. There is in no world, if Petr Yan and Merab put on just strictly boxing gloves and had to box, the fight would be over in 45 seconds and Petr Yan would be the one with his hand raised, because with pure boxing and pure striking technique, Petr Yan is definitely the more talented out of these two guys, but it comes down to how many opportunities is Petr Yan going to have at range, because Merab Dvalishvili is nothing if not dedicated to a game plan, and even if he is 0 for 11, 0 for 12, 0 for 13, he's willing to go 0 for 45. It's like that Kobe Bryant tweet, like, I'd rather you go 1 for 40 than 1 for 16, because if you go 1 for 16, it means that you gave up at one point. Merab isn't going to give up with his game plan. I do think it'll be interesting because for a guy who has such great 15-minute cardio, I will be curious to see how that holds up with 10 extra minutes, because Petr Yan will go through some points of his fights where he might not be the most active guy. He might be waiting a little bit defensively, but can he last 25 minutes? Of course he can, and he does carry power late into his fights. Remember how he dropped Corey Sandhagen in the 5th round of that matchup with that crazy left hook into his spinning back fist? I just think this fight's going to be very interesting because for as exciting of a prospect as Dvalishvili has been, he has faced some interesting roadblocks. Again, he got put on almost a poster against Marlon Moraes there. So for Merab, the weaknesses are there, but we just all know how good those strengths are at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a left hand that wobbled Merab, and then he kind of dropped, and then you also had another left hook that dropped him, and Moraes ends up on top, but by the end of the first round, it's Merab who's on top.
That was so crazy.
Is Marlon out? It's one of the craziest rounds you're ever going to see. And then at the start of the second round, Merab, like a shark with blood in the water, just goes right after it. And he's able to get it done. Ground and pound finish. So if you do consider it and you look at both of these guys, for Merab, the level competition, it starts with Terrion Ware on the win streak. We got guys like Gustavo Lopez, John Dodson, Cody Stamann, Marlon Moraes, and then of course, Jose Aldo. But here's a crazy stat. Marlon was a great fighter. He was up at the top. Jose Aldo, obviously had his time. That was a retirement fight. But for Merab, 10th all-time in UFC history with 63 takedowns. Number 1 all-time in bantamweight history with 50. Well, where's the 13 takedowns? He fought Gustavo Lopez at a catch weight of 140 and landed 13 takedowns in that fight against Gustavo Lopez, who can wrestle a little bit in his own right. So if you look at it for this fight, You can't just say, oh, Merab, he's a black belt in judo. He's a 2019 Combat Sambo silver medalist. That's all he is. The hands have gotten better. He walks in, he'll paw his left hand out. He'll try and land the overhand right quite a bit. He throws a lot of spinning back fists. It's to either a giant positive, like his win over Ralphion Stotts that got him the contract, or he just sits there and spins and spins and spins like a Tasmanian devil. When you look at it for Petr Yan, you said it. I mean, he's no stranger to a 5-round fight. The ECB champ before he came into the UFC. His lone loss there to Magomedov, where the takedowns, the striking, kind of bit him a little bit. But in their rematch, he came out guns a-blazing. But then in the UFC, lose to Aljamain Sterling, it's a feeling out process at the start where he loses traction in terms of scoring with the rounds.
He beat the brakes off him until he got disqualified in the first.
That's where I'm going. He ends up getting disqualified. He then goes out, beats Corey Sandhagen for the interim belt in the rematch against Aljamain Sterling, who had his back taken for most of that fight. It was Petr Yan. And then against the guy, and I know a lot of people, controversial as it is.
I thought Yan won it, but it was close.
Against Sean O'Malley, MMA decision. 7 scored at 30-27 for Yan. 18 scored at 29-28 Yan. 1 scored at 29-28 for Sean O'Malley. Cartilage and Leatherby scored it for O'Malley over Petr Yan.
You had that O'Malley on the fight companion.
I did. That was the first non-title fight for Petr Yan since he fought Uriah Faber back in 2019. So first non-title fight, first non-5-round fight, and maybe Yan had to get back into a 3-round atmosphere to get ready for that one. It really is tough. A lot of question marks around that fight.
I do think a 5-round atmosphere favors Yan.
Daniel Cormier went on DC and RC and kind of speculated to the fact that maybe Petr Yan was going to retire.
Well,
but
he said that.
Yan's management company was really quick to come out after that and say, no, he's not going to retire. So Yan for this one back at Tiger Muay Thai, Merab back at Longo Weidman MMA, but Merab Dvalishvili, like he's getting choked out by ladies in bikinis that are having a good time.
They got the defense, though.
Ray Longo's talking about it. Yeah, you grab it. Grab that piece.
And that Georgian hammer.
He's also the type of guy in winter to jump into a frozen lake and then eat a bunch of sticks on the way in. So, Merab.
I'd love to have a beer with Merab Dvalishvili. It would be one of the more interesting 45 minutes I think you could spend with a human.
You think a Merab beer lasts 45 minutes?
No, it probably lasts 45 seconds for him. I just hope that the time we spend together lasts close to an hour. Merab would be an interesting character because the vibes seem great, but I brought it up a few times already. A lot of what Merab does is the threat of the wrestling, which then opens up his striking. And what Petr Yan is great at is making you pay for your inaccuracies with your striking. Aljamain Sterling in their first fight throws a lot of volume, but the problem with throwing a lot of volume when it's not picture perfect is you do leave some openings with your strikes, and Petr Yan is doing a great job at really making him pay for the openings. And I think Merab is going to leave a lot of those similar openings in this fight. Can Merab win rounds by defending his head, going for takedowns, and really making it a gritty fight against Petr Yan? I think he can, but the problem is Yan does a great job with his counter strikes, and he makes his strikes really count when he throws his power ones. Like, you bring up the Uriah Faber fight, you bring up the Jimmy Rivera fight. When he decides to really plant and throw his strikes, there are devastating consequences. So hopefully Merab can show a more evolved game plan to where he's not just spamming some of those big power techniques. Maybe he will have more of a developmental game to putting his jab together with the power shots with his wrestling, because if he ever puts it all together, I'm telling you right now, it is a dangerous proposition for everybody else in the division. But he does lack the one thing you brought up, which is the back control and some of the more controlling techniques on the mat. I do think he's a little bit loose on
top. Which O'Malley was able to do in that fight a little bit.
O'Malley was, but the thing about O'Malley is he has such great technique at range that it was difficult for Petr Yan to get on the inside, and I still thought Petr Yan did a good enough job at winning that fight. So again, I think I think Merab is going to make a great account of himself. He is a very excited contender. There is no quit in Merab Dvalishvili, but I do think Yan is the more damaging of the two on the feet, and I think that's going to be the big X factor.
Yeah, and it was interesting because my slip up of Yan and O'Malley, but in the Yan fight with O'Malley, it was Yan going out there for the takedowns, Yan trying to initiate some of the wrestling, and for O'Malley from distance he had success with the striking, something that Petr Yan is a wizard at.
Exactly.
So the thing that's going to interest me the most is what stance are we going to see Petr Yan come out of, and what are we going to see him find his success at with his boxing combinations? Is he going to offer up different stance switches against such a good wrestler in Merab?
I think he's going to open orthodox, but he will switch southpaw, but I'll say he'll open right-handed.
And we'll see if that opens more the threat of the takedown from Merab. But a giant all-timer type of fight in this bantamweight division. You've seen fight of the nights out of Petr Yan in the past, and you think of a guy that brought the fight to him and brought the best out of Petr Yan. Remember that fight with Jinsu Son? That was a fight of the night.
Wild.
Son was able to get a takedown, performance bonus over Uriah Faber, fight of the night against Corey Sandhagen. And again, I said this to open the show, but if Chandler Chandler and Gaethje didn't exist, Jan and Sandhagen probably would have been fight of the year a couple of years ago. So we have a look at the odds in the matchup. Jan is the favorite. He's continuing to gain there. Merab, underdog, like so. We have a look in the YouTube community tab for this one. We threw that out there in the morning. You folks voted. Almost 1,000 total votes. 70% Jan, 30% Dvalishvili. Dominic is saying, I know Merab has wrestling advantage, but I have a feeling Petr is going to try and finish the fight from the recent razor-close decisions.
That's a good take.
2 split decision losses in a row for Jan. I think many will be against me, but I feel like Merab is going to win from a name that's way too long. Flying Moose, Jan has been training for Aljo for so long, I feel like Merab is just a worse version of him, so I'm going to take Jan by finish. I don't agree with how you got to your answer, but we'll go from that. And Tom is saying Merab. So it's a tricky one. You know, the fan vote and the way that people go is usually a little bit different, but 70% going with Petr in the matchup. We've been big on, you know,
I feel like I've been high on Merab, though, honestly.
It's a tough pick when you try and get down to it.
It certainly is, and that's the thing. Both guys are extremely talented. I've said this 1,000 times throughout these videos. The bantamweight division is arguably the best in the whole entire UFC. I do have Petr, though, for these reasons. If Merab Dvalishvili is going to win this fight, a lot of it is going to be based off of the control factor, be it with the clinch and with the takedowns, and not necessarily with a lot of the damaging strikes. Whereas with Petr, he really makes you pay when he is throwing a lot of those strikes. And Jan's one of those unique guys who can lose 4 minutes of a round based on the control to just come back in those last 60 seconds and really shift the ties based on his striking. We saw that in the Jimmy Rivera fight. Rivera won 14 minutes of that fight. It just so happened that the last 20 seconds of every round were just so dominant for Petr. And again, Dvalishvili has incredible cardio. I don't doubt his cardio. That's not what I'm sitting here saying. I'm just curious to see what his output with his takedowns is going to look like in a 25-minute atmosphere as opposed to a 15-minute one. So I think it's a great fight for Merab, but I do find myself favoring Petr.
And I mean, Merab, 8 wins in a row, and you go down through some of these wins. Gustavo Lopez, Tyrion Ware, Brad Katona, who's back on The Ultimate Fighter. He did finish Marlon Moraes in one of the wildest comebacks you've ever seen because he got put on skates a couple of times, ended the first round in a great position, and then finished it in the second. Merab's got a great opportunity in the matchup. I'm going to go with Petr here, and I think it's the boxing combinations on the outside, the footwork that are really going to play a factor for him. But again, we've seen Petr where he's been in some of these compromising positions. Exactly. You guys talk about Aljamain Sterling, Merab's not as good as him, whatever. Aljamain Sterling's only getting better because of Merab Dvalishvili, and likewise, Merab's going to be able to gain from the insight out of 2 fights that Sterling's already had.
Different kind of grapplers, too. Sterling's much more of the jiu-jitsu side of the grappling. Of course, he has great wrestling, don't get me wrong. Whereas Merab's much more of that power wrestling.
Just fitting like a glove, that compliment there. But Matt, an absolutely great fight card on this one. 14 total fights as of taping on Sunday night. But of course, Nurmagomedov, he might end up back on the card. Maybe some fights fall out, fights are added, whatever. You can find us here at Fight Night Picks for all of those updates. Really, really big and high on some of these prospects that are featured here, and a decent amount of ranked contenders, 6 of them on the card so far. Bantamweight, really the showcase division on this one, so I can't wait for it. I mean, listen, the theater at the Virgin Hotels, first time they're playing host to a UFC card. It used to be the Joint at the Hard Rock. Some big Tom Petty concerts there way back in the day.
To quote Drake, she want to rebound with me, I'm down to go get us some boards. We just came off one of the best pay-per-views of the year, and the fact that we get this card as sort of the hangover, if you will, to
Board
the
man
great
gets
fight
paid
is phenomenal, because that's the thing. Could you imagine if we had like a Norma Dumont main event to follow a John Jones versus Cyril Gane one? Yeah, nobody would be excited for that, but we have Petr, a man who I have said on this channel I thought was going to become the GOAT of the bantamweight division. I genuinely think that's the ceiling that this man possesses based off the skills that he's shown, but how can you doubt a guy like Merab Dvalishvili, who seems like every single time people bring up some of the shortcomings in his game, but the wrestling, the cardio, just the stick-to-itiveness seems to get him the win, so it's a great card top to bottom.
Give him flack when they deserve it, give him praise when they deserve it. After this, it's Edwards versus Usman, then Vera versus Sandhagen, Pereira versus Adesanya.
We're on a good run right now.
Holloway versus Allen, Pavlovich, Blades. It just continues to go on and on and on, so the UFC's got a pretty darn good slate of fights coming up. You can check out all of the great action here at Fight Night Picks, Twitter and Instagram, the YouTube channel as well. Those individual videos come out soon, and we also have question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. If there's any pick changes, the official ones get locked in there on Saturday. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.